Good morning from unseasonably warm Kansas City. This is SportsBeat Live, our weekly chat and therapy session about the Kansas City Royals with the writers who know them best. Beat writer Lynn Worthy and columnist Sam McDowell are here today. And with you, send us your question and comments, and we will talk Royals with you. We, of course, as always, sponsored by the University of Kansas Health System, and we'll hear from them later in the show. I'm back after a week of week absence, and listening to you guys last week. That was the day that the Royals were getting ready to play the Cardinals, and they ended up winning that game that night 7-1. I believe that was the Bobby Witt Jr. first home run game, and then the Royals followed that up with a 10-0 loss to the Cardinals. They go out to Baltimore and win the opening game of that series, and then lose two in a row. Second game of a doubleheader, and then yesterday's game. So it's my way of saying that the Royals had some moments in the last week since the last time you guys talked, but they cannot seem to create any momentum for themselves. They cannot follow up a victory with another victory. In fact, they've only twice this season have they done that. Have they followed a victory with a victory? They won their first two to open the season, and then they had a little 3-game winning streak about a week later, and since then, no streaks at all. So, Lynn, why is this happening?
Well, the cliche is momentum is the next day's starting pitcher, right? So that's one of the places, not the only place, but that's one of the places. I mean, if you look at coming off of the win they had in the first game, Daniel Lynch gave up, was it 3 early in the second game, I think. But they also just didn't score a whole lot of runs for him either. So, I mean, that was, that's still been a problem. That's an ongoing problem. Of course, that's been that's probably contributed more so than some of the pitching things that we've seen. Because the pitching overall has been fairly solid. I mean, even like I say, Lynch gave up some runs in that game, but he still only gave up, I think, 3 that day. And he's been, Lynch, Greinke, and Keller have been the guys you've been counting on. So, but yeah, it just seems like the offense being inconsistent. When they're able to scratch out some runs, it's not a whole lot. And then, it doesn't give the pitchers a whole lot of margin. And sometimes the pitchers, hit their speed bumps. I'm not sure that – I mean, both teams had to deal with the bunch of days off too because, you mentioned Baltimore. I was in Baltimore, it feels like 2-3 days before I saw any baseball. So, but both teams had to deal with that. So, yeah, it's just ups and downs in multiple areas right now.
Yeah, you get to spend an all-star break in Baltimore last weekend. So – that was amazing. Yeah, the Royals had a scheduled off day, traveling to Baltimore, and then did not play Friday or Saturday and didn't get that thing going until Sunday. So the life of a beat writer, you get to hang out a couple of days in Baltimore without any baseball. So, Sam, what are you seeing from the Royals or not seeing from the Royals here the last week plus, I guess?
Well, I mean, I think the most alarming thing is you're not seeing development from the younger arms. I mean, it's the pitching staff as a whole ranks in the bottom 4 in ERA, but I think most alarming is just that, you've got young arms that were supposed to be linchpins of this rotation by this year, and they're non-contributors. I mean, we saw Chris Bubich get moved to the bullpen last week. We've seen Brady Singer and Jackson Coar get moved to Omaha, and, Daniel Lynch looks like he could be something, but, that's 4 pieces of a draft that were supposed to comprise this rotation by this year. And these guys came from college thinking that, one of the benefits of them coming from college was that accelerated path to get here by this time. When Salvi Perez and Whit Merrifield would still be in their primes. And, Whit Merrifield has taken a precipitous drop. Salvador Perez hasn't gotten going yet this year other than a streak of home runs early in the season. And, when you combine the fact that those guys aren't ready yet, and now I think it's fair to question if they ever will be ready, And then you're seeing some of the veterans that are having a decline in the first 6 weeks of the season. It's the timing is really not matching up for the way the Royals plan for this to work.
Yeah, certainly not early this season. That's for sure. Let's talk about one of those pitchers, Chris Bubich, who when I went through basically last week's schedule, he was the starter in that 10-0 loss. He's made 5 starts this year, and in 4 of those games, the Royals lost 17-3, 13-7, 12-2, and 10-0. Bubich's ERA is 13.14 in 12 1/3 innings pitched. Opponents have a 340 batting average against him. He is no longer in the rotation, Lynn, is he? When are we going to see Chris Bubich again?
That's to be determined. I mean, he's available. I mean, you could see him today out of the bullpen, but he's not scheduled to make a start. They're going to need a starter here in another day or so. They have not announced who that's going to be. But Chris Bubich is going to be in the pen. He could throw today. He could have thrown yesterday, and he's not. As of yesterday, I think before the game, I was talking to him a little bit, and there's no schedule. There's no, be sitting tight for this day or that day. At least not as of pregame yesterday. He's a bullpen arm. I would say though, just is about Sam's comment about those 4 guys. I mean, best case scenario, they all could have been in the rotation, but I don't think that you could necessarily coming out of that draft expect you're going to draft 4 guys to be in your rotation. I mean, the likelihood. I mean, the people will go back and forth on the numbers. I think I've talked to a couple people with the Royals. Is like, if you think you've got 10 guys, the way that's going to ultimately shake out is probably you might have 2. Just in terms of like guys who you think could be starters, because there'll be guys who just, don't quite pan out, guys who get injured, things like that. Now, all 4 of those guys looked like they had potential to be there. And some of them may still be there. But that's also the reason that you have Keller and Greinke there, because you weren't going to rely on all 4 of those guys and say, okay, we'll just fill in the 5th one, and or Carlos Hernandez, who you want to add in there, who wasn't part of the draft class. But yeah, I mean, they're definitely, that was the big question mark coming into this season. It's still a question mark, and I think, as Sam says, there's probably more questions to be asked or to be, I guess, answered, I should say, as we see how that goes along.
Blair, when you look at 2 of their 5 members of the rotation, Hernandez and Bubich, they've thrown 35 innings this year and 10 starts. I mean, they're not even averaging getting through 4 innings. And so we thought early in the season that their bullpen looked like it could be something. When you're asking your bullpen to throw, 5+ innings, 2 out of every 5 nights, I wonder what toll that's going to have on the bullpen over the back half of the season.
All right. One of those, we mentioned Carlos Hernandez just a moment ago, and boy, he got through the order one time pretty well at Baltimore on the Monday morning start here, and then he got roughed up and scuffled, and that was it. So let's hear what Mike Matheny had to say about Carlos Hernandez's start yesterday, and I want to ask you guys if you pick up anything else from Matheny in his response here. So go ahead, Monty. Let's roll Mike Matheny.
He described Carlos's night.
I thought his first 4 were about the best first 4 he's had all season, and just gets into a bind in the 5th, and gets us out. He's at the bottom of the order, and walk, and then gets into a place to get a swing and miss pitch. And I think he just made a mistake that ended up costing a couple, and then it was hard to stop the bleeding once that happened. But up until that point, I thought it was about as good as he's been. I know the walk frustrated him, but he's been doing a good job of putting stuff like that behind him and then getting the next pitch. And I think once it did, he gave up the single with the men on 2nd and 3rd. At that point, I think he was having a little trouble letting that one go. And it doesn't take long in this game, especially you roll the lineup over and then you're looking at the top. He does get a second out. We're looking at a 2-1 game right there with 2 outs. He entered the inning at 46 pitches. So, I think he was just cruising so well. Then a couple things went out of kind of against the plan. And I think he had trouble reining it back in. It's a shame because he had really good stuff today. He knows what he's trying to do. And we get to the 9-hole hitter right there, and he gets to chase a high strike, and I think he tried to repeat it, but then he ended up giving a better pitch than what he should have, and he knows that. But knowing it and executing are two different things, and when you get pressure on you, it makes it that much harder. But he knew what he wanted to do, and he'd been executing really good pitches in the strike zone and outside all day long. It just in that particular spot, when you're in a close game too, we're giving one run. We got one run. They feel like they have to be perfect sometimes, and I know that isn't easy on any pitching staff. So until the offense gets going, there's going to be more pressure on our pitchers. And our defense. Not exactly how you want to be going about it, but you got to figure out how to do your piece, and when things start to unravel, to rein them in. He's done a good job of that. The whole staff has, for the most part. Today, one got away. Big hit by O'Hearn right there too. Bobby getting a great jump on the steal after getting us just some momentum. And, we know their pitcher hasn't given up a lot this year. He threw well, didn't make a lot of mistakes, and the longer he went, the better he got. Changeup was really an impressive pitch, but we had some chances, especially late. We get guys in scoring position. We got to figure out how to put crooked numbers together by just stacking hits on top of each other, and they're just hard to come by right now.
Left on base numbers, and we talked about it so much to put the pressure on the pitchers.
Yeah. Same conversation. Guys they're talking about it themselves. They know. It's no secret. Trying to get big hits in big situations. We've had some opportunities, and just haven't been able to put them together.
Encouraging to see Salvi sort of sticking with what you saw yesterday in terms of sort of trying not to do too much.
Yeah, I believe that will eventually become contagious, but not many teams are opening up their infield like they just did to him. Just smart hitting, especially when you're not feeling really locked in. Just take what they're going to give you, and I thought he did a nice job of that.
That video comes courtesy of Lynn Worthy, as does most of the video that is provided on this show. I thought Mike Matheny, after kind of getting through a description of Carlos Hernandez, had some interesting things to say about the hitting. And I want to get into that with you guys right after we hear from the University of Kansas Health System.
March 4th, 2015, I got out of the shower and felt a lump in my left breast.
We were able to quickly uncover that she had 2 subtypes of breast cancer, each of them requiring separate and unique treatment plans. This is why you come to the University of Kansas Cancer Center.
It is critical to be treated by a team of experts in that specific cancer type.
If you don't start with us, I think you'll have more questions than answers.
Why would you go anywhere else?
Okay, we're back on SportsBeat Live with beat writer Lynn Worthy and columnist Sam McDowell. We just heard from Mike Matheny, and I thought among his more interesting thoughts there had to do with hitting, and something words to this effect. And until the offense gets going, it's going to put pressure on our pitchers. Got to figure out how to put up crooked numbers or put crooked numbers together. So he's absolutely right, Sam. We can talk about the pitching. I'm not saying it's been good, but it's been ahead of the hitting. And when Royals come up, especially with runners in scoring position, with opportunities to put together an inning, it just doesn't seem to happen. I go back to that game we started talking about, the win over the Cardinals last week. They finally broke through with a big inning late, the Bobby Witt home run game. But that is so much the exception rather than the rule this season.
Yeah, the pitching staff doesn't take all the blame just because the lineup has been so terrible. They're last in the majors in total bases this year. They're bottom 2 in doubles, triples, homers. They're bottom 4 in OPS. So, by every metric, it's just a large way of saying that this is no fluke, what the Royals' record is. In fact, the Pythagorean theorem, the record has them as actually supposed to be worse than what they are. I mean, they've got the second worst run differential, and, thank God for the Cincinnati Reds and their tanking. But the Royals are in this stage of accidentally tanking, it feels like right now. I mean, they're as much worse lineup than I think we all anticipated. And it's because, they've got veteran guys who aren't producing. You went in before the season thinking that who are the two guys you wanted up at the plate with runners on base, runners in scoring position? It would be Salvador Perez and Whit Merrifield. Those two guys lead the team in those situations, and they're not scoring runs.
Yeah. And look, hey, the Reds actually won a few games this past weekend. So catching up with the Royals. Yeah, yeah. So no, you're right about that, Sam. They're both of those guys. Although Salvi actually had a pretty good Baltimore, didn't he, Lynn?
Yeah, he had 2 hits in all 3 of the games. I think there was one or two doubles in there, but actually it seemed to be shortening up and sort of just, it seemed like there's a bunch of games where he was just swinging for fences, and he talked about it after the doubleheader. Because he's always an aggressive swinger. We all know that. You watch him for 2 games and you realize he's a free swinger. But I think last year, and we talked a little bit about it last week, but last year that aggressiveness was part of what made that year so magical, was because, he would maybe go looking for pitches outside the zone, but he still wasn't missing them. Well, when you miss them and you put yourself in bad counts and you're putting pressure on yourself to be the guy who has to come through, it was a bad recipe. And that's, he had a stretch. I think it was before that first 2-hit game, he had 2 hits in like almost 40 at bats. And so it was a long stretch of just, futility for a guy who they have to have produce. And I think that was part of it, was him feeling like he had to be the one to produce and just sort of making it even, piling on top of himself, just gripping a little bit. But some signs there in the last 2 days, 3 games with 2 hits each. We'll see if that continues.
I remember the stretch Salvi was on after the All-Star break, where he went on that home run binge, a home run in 5 straight games, had the grand slams. I remember the series at Seattle was part of that, but I had forgotten until I read it, Lynn, in your story, that he had another stretch in April, maybe into May, where he had a couple of games in a series where he had walk-off hits and, there was some clutch hitting for the Royals then. And, but we just have not seen that. Hardly.
Well, and a lot of that was Salvi. I mean, that's the thing. Right. I mean, like, it was, again, it was him feeling like he had to do it. And then last year he did it in April. It seemed like he did it just about every time. I mean, I think it was 2 walk-offs. One of those was a home run. One was a hit that was reminiscent of the wild card game. But then there was another home run that was like late. That wasn't a walk-off, but it was the go-ahead home run that's decided the game in the 7th inning or something like that. And I remember specifically, because they were doing the high leverage thing with the bullpen. Everybody's like, well, who's the closer? Who's the closer? And I was like, well, there's not a closer. Then after the 3rd walk-off, I said, Salvi's your closer. There you go.
That's right. So maybe he is starting to fight out of this. Would like to see a little more power. I used to think going to Baltimore meant that's where you can get your power stroke back, but not anymore. Not since they moved those fences back and built them up. It's a whole different ballpark now than it used to be. At least when the Royals were there for the ALCS back in 2014. Sam, you mentioned it, and we had Lynn's video of Whit Merrifield on 2 weeks ago, and Whit was talking about not having not off to a great start, but there were some indicators that he was just kind of unlucky. His hard hit percentage, that sort of thing, batting average with balls in play also, but there's just no getting around it. The numbers are just miserable now for Whit Merrifield. Last time we talked, he had not hit lower than 1st or 2nd in the batting order, and ever since then he's been 5 or 6. He's got his consecutive games played streak still going, and you wonder how much longer the Royals can carry that if he's not going to produce at the plate. It's maddening and frustrating for Royals fans to watch this, but there's also you just feel a little bit for the guy too, who just missed the 2014 and 2015 teams, and came up later and produced in a big way for several years. But until he turns this around, this is one of the biggest drop-offs I think I've ever seen from a player, Sam. I've got some Merrifield numbers in front of me, but I don't want to go there. They're just terrible.
You know, he's sort of been on this decline year by year for like 3 seasons now. But it's so wild that to see this extended because those advanced metrics still are in line with his career norms. I mean, his hard hit percentage is higher than it's been any year except for the year that he got called up. What was it, 16?
Yeah.
Hard hit percentage, I think, is 1 out of every 3 balls he puts in play is considered a hard hit ball, and which puts his expected batting average still around 250. Now, just like Lynn said, you know, Salvi's got to produce for this lineup to produce. Whit Merrifield's got to hit better than 250 for this lineup to be anything. But the numbers aren't anywhere near 250 right now. And so the numbers show that he's still, you know, it's not like since we last chatted about this 2 or 3 weeks ago that suddenly he's just not hitting. He's still hitting into some really poor luck. And I'm sure he's going through this thought process right now of how can it be me for 6 weeks? You know, how can I be the guy that's had some bad luck for 6 weeks now? So it's a combination of the two. You know, he's hitting into some bad luck, but you know, he needs to hit better than 250 too. You know, if his expected batting average is around 300, maybe he's hitting around 220. So I think it's just the combination of the two right now. But, you know, it is important to say that he's hitting the ball harder than the numbers would have you believe.
I think his was the one that Cedric Mullins made the highlight reels on yesterday too, with the diving catch in center field. And I remember just watching, and I think it seemed like maybe I'm just making more out of it because of the numbers being what they were. It seemed like Whit rounded first and just stood there and was handling his hips for like an extra couple of seconds. Like, really?
Yeah. Well, you know, he's not striking out anywhere like above his career average. One thing that is a little different. He's hitting a lot of fly balls. He's never been a big fly ball guy, but he's hitting a lot of fly balls, and those tend to be outs, and so that percentage is up. Again, you know, batting average on balls in play 152. So that kind of indicates that he's not catching many breaks, but he's also, you know, more fly ball than line drive. And you know, how many times do we see him lead off a game with just a, you know, line shot up the middle, or, you know, something through the left side, or, you know, we're doinking one to right field. You just don't see that with Whit this season. And it is, you know, what are we, 20? I'm trying to think of the record. 26 games into this. Yeah, they're 9-17, 8 games out of first place, and this has to be the most prolonged slump of his career. So.
And Blair, to your point, you know, also pulling the ball more than, you know, he has been. You know, I think, you know, 37, 38% of his balls, I looked it up yesterday, are hit to left field. You know, he's a guy that, you know, I mean, like most right-handed hitters, hit the ball to left field a lot and up the middle a lot, but he's not going the other way as frequently as he did. And Lynn, you know, to bring this back to Salvi for a second time, I mean, Lynn mentioned, you know, that Salvi's trying – you know, to get out of this phase of trying to do too much, and therefore, you know, when you can poke the ball the other way and just do something simple, sometimes that can get you going. And you do wonder if maybe Whit Merrifield, you know, can make the adjustment of not pulling the ball as frequently. And you know, like you mentioned, I hadn't even looked at that number, but I'd be interested to see how many times he's getting under the ball as opposed to topping it over his career norm.
All right, so let's talk about player injuries are starting to pile up a little bit. Look, finally, like Edward Olivares was going to get his opportunity to stay with the Royals and not do the Omaha Shuffle, and then he gets hurt. So one guy, he had been swinging the bat pretty well, had a 4-hit game last week, Lynn, I believe. And what about the Olivares injury?
Yeah, he injured his quad in the first game of Sunday's doubleheader, and he went on the IL yesterday. So, and there's no timetable right now, but with a quad strain. So, I mean, you still have Kyle Isbell, who Left-handed hitter who can play the outfield, who can play multiple spots out there. There was sort of going to be a little bit of how you finding time for everybody because you still have Dozier. Santana's on the IL right now too, so you can put Dozier at first. Potentially, maybe it means you get MJ Melendez's bat in the lineup a little bit more now because obviously Salvi's going to be in there every day, whether it's catching in DH or DH, I should say. And Melendez, has played some outfield in AAA. We haven't seen the majors yet, but that gives you another option where you don't, again, without Santana and Olivares. They brought Sebastian Rivero up, so you have a third catcher, so you have yourself covered if you have, both of your catchers in the lineup, because we saw that the day that Cam Gallagher got hurt. You had both catchers in the lineup, and you moved Salvi back to catcher from DH, and you were basically pinch hitting for the pitcher spot every time through because you lost the DH. You don't have to worry about that, and you're covered for injury. So, but yeah, he was, finally starting to show that there's still a little bit of uneasiness in the outfield with some plays, but actually one of those plays in that game that he left was the play he got hurt on, because there's a couple, it seems like coming in on some balls. It just seems to be a little, just still rough edges, I guess you would call it, defensively. But the bat has been encouraging.
All right, so the Royals are at Texas. They open up a 3-game series, right, against the Rangers, and then they finish the week with a trip to Colorado to play the Rockies, who are playing kind of better than expected so far this year. The Royals still need to come up with a 5th starter, right, Lynn? Do we know any guesses on who that's going to be?
They have not announced yet. I know it's still, I'm trying to think, today's date, the 10th. I think you're still outside of the time frame where you can't be Brady yet. So it couldn't be bringing back Brady Singer because he went down on the 28th, I believe. And aside from doubleheader or taking an injury replacement, I think he's got to have 15 days down there. So just looking at the 40-man, that means maybe somebody like Jonathan Heasley, Kowar, somebody like that, who's at AAA. I think Heasley's been doing better recently. I'd have to go back and check and see what day he lines up for. Off the top of my head, I don't remember. That, or I don't know that they would do an opener type thing again, but we've seen them do that in the past. Again, Bubich is here, but as far as we know, he's a bullpen guy. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. They haven't announced anything yet.
Okay, so Royals throughout the week. Hopefully, we'll go a week without a Royals game ending without it being on television. That caught Kansas Cityans once again over the weekend. So, hey, listen, great stuff from beat writer Lynn Worthy and columnist Sam McDowell. And big thanks to our sponsor, the University of Kansas Health System, and to producer Monty Davis, who put together today's show. So, Larry Looper, thanks for checking in, and thanks to everybody who watched us today. Come back and see us next Tuesday at 10 a.m., and the Royals will be home then against the White Sox. Okay, guys, thanks a lot.